Thank you very much. I appreciate the warm welcome and the hospitality. Please forgive me if I stumble over my words a little bit. I just arrived last night, so I'm still adjusting to the time. I have to say it's very humbling to follow that presentation by Dr. Lin. I think the range of publications, the scientific investigation, really informing the literature about what we know about EV-A71 is very, very impressive. So within CDC, I'm within I'm the team, I serve as team lead for the coronavirus program. So this is within the Division of Viral Diseases, and my division director, Mark Palanche, sends his best regards to the group. I'm primarily coming from the epidemiology side. We coordinate closely with the coronavirus laboratory, which is Steve Ogerste and Alan Miggs. And I think just to say right up front, we certainly feel like in the U.S. we certainly don't have the extent of EV-A71 circulation and certainly severe disease that is present in Asia, parts of Asia, and specifically here in Taiwan. But really, we don't, and I want to cover a little bit our surveillance. We really acknowledge that there's a lot that we don't know about circulation within the U.S. So I'm very happy and privileged to be here today, to have the opportunity to share with the group and really to learn from some of the lessons learned over the last couple of decades here, which can inform what we do going forward at CDC. So I'll start with just a real quick overview. Then I want to touch on enterovirus surveillance in the U.S., so what we know, what we don't know, some of the limitations, and then touch on the recent EV-D68 activity in the U.S. And more recent EV-A71 activity in the U.S. So at risk of boring everyone, just quickly, just a few slides on enterovirus. The enterovirus genus has 4 enterovirus species, 3 rhinovirus species, over 250 named types associated with human illness. The non-polio enteroviruses are ubiquitous globally. Transmission is primarily through fecal, oral, and respiratory transmission. Incubation period is typically very short. In the U.S., similar to other temperate regions, most seasonality is traditionally summer and fall. In more tropical areas, there's a flatter distribution and more year-round transmission, sometimes clustered during rainy season. But against that backdrop, I think we all understand this unpredictable nature of trying to understand annual variations in circulations and the unpredictability of outbreaks of virus types, making it extremely difficult to try to predict or really anticipate what exactly is coming. And just to touch briefly, as Dr. Lin did, on the clinical syndromes and manifestations, as he mentioned, most infections are asymptomatic or result in mild illness. So there's a huge range of clinical syndromes and manifestations, primarily involving mucocutaneous, visceral, and neurologic manifestations. Certain manifestations are often associated with specific enterovirus types. So with that just brief backdrop, I wanted to move on to surveillance in the U.S., what we're doing, and what we would sort of like to know more about going forward. So we have 2 primary systems for enterovirus surveillance in the U.S. The first is NESS, the National Enterovirus Surveillance System. It monitors trends in circulating enteroviruses and parvoviruses going back to 1961. In the U.S., it's the only data source for trends in type in enterovirus infections nationally. NESS is a voluntary, passive, laboratory-based surveillance system, and reporting is not compulsory in the U.S. We collect specimen type, collection date, and limited demographic information, age, gender, state of residence. We aren't able to consistently collect outcome data. Again, this information is reported from the laboratories. Often they aren't aware of data, so that's a limitation. Our surveillance objectives within NES to monitor long-term circulation patterns for individual enteroviruses. They help interpret trends in enteroviral diseases by association with circulating serotypes, to support characterization of outbreaks through linkage of disease clusters with individual types, and importantly, to help guide development of new diagnostic tests and therapies. The second system we use to a limited extent is NERVS, or the National Respiratory and Enterovirus Surveillance System. So again, this is a passive laboratory-based surveillance system. It monitors real-time circulation of respiratory and enteric viruses. This is not patient-level data. This is specimen-based aggregate results. It has pretty simple goals here: to monitor real-time circulation and trends in seasonality of respiratory and enteric viruses. It's weekly reporting of the total number of tests performed and the number of positives. So basically, each week, the sites would report the number of detections and the total number of tests run. This allows us to track the proportion of positive tests to monitor circulation. So the information collected through NES and through NERVS are published in MMWR with multi-year summaries. We recently, early this year, published the 2014 to 2016 surveillance, and I will just touch on that briefly here. So this is just our geographic distribution of our information we collect. NES, so the type enteroviruses are coming from all 50 states. The information collected, percent positivity through NERVS, is collected in, I think, 43 of 50 states. So we have reasonable geographic representation. We published the most frequently reported enterovirus and pariechoviruses with each of these. And in this 3-year period, 2014-2016, again, the data in this publication is really skewed by what happened in 2014. You can see EV-D68 comprising a majority of the 2,700 reports came in, so a very unusual year. And then following that, sort of the usual cast of enteroviruses that we commonly see. And this portfolio sort of changes with each year annually. From NERVS, again with the percent positivity data, it's an opportunity to look at seasonality, and this is showing sort of the summer, fall distribution of enterovirus circulation in the U.S. So I think as I summarize the surveillance in the U.S., I think it's very important to also point out the limitations, what we don't know. So this is voluntary passive reporting, which definitely affects consistency, timeliness. We also acknowledge that most severe enteroviral diseases is in younger patients. Severe disease is much more likely to be tested and typed. So certainly we would acknowledge that younger patients are probably overrepresented in our surveillance. And again, detection and reporting is definitely going to be influenced by the attention received and the investigations performed. For example, in 2014, we encouraged specimen collections from severe patients. We encouraged typing, so we probably drove up that number. So certainly this is a limitation or certainly has to be understood when we look at the data. And really importantly, the majority of U.S. public health labs no longer culture enteroviruses, which has definitely impacted the reporting to NES. Some state labs have begun enterovirus direct detection and sequencing, and certainly we collect data from them. So then just kind of on that backdrop of surveillance in the U.S., just want to touch on a couple of recent outbreaks and activity, starting with EV-D68. So historically in the U.S., since its original isolation in 1962, EV-D68 has been pretty rarely reported in the U.S. And in the 35 years between 1970 and 2005, there were only 26 reports, so less than one a year for that period. Small clusters, EV-D68 associated with respiratory illness, were reported during 2009 and 10. And in that period, between 2009 and 2013, there were a total of 79 reports. And then 2014 was definitely a banner year for EV-D68 in the U.S. as well as other parts of the world. But in August of 2014, reports started to come into the health departments and CDC from several locations about an increase in children hospitalized with severe respiratory illness. These increases were surprising given the time of year. It was outside of sort of the typical winter respiratory season. And also, immediately we began to hear about wheezing and asthma exacerbation associated with these presentations. And also very concerning that illness severity associated with this. Hospitals told us of increased hospitalization and ICU admissions, very unusual. So really to understand what was going on, this is one example. We had several early reporters, and we looked at their syndromic surveillance just to understand how does what's happening in 2014, how does that match up to what's traditionally seen. And this was one syndromic surveillance system showing the spike in cases. This is just non-specific respiratory illness. Beginning in about mid-August, running to about mid-October, you can see a very well-defined spike. And this was replicated in other areas as well. The diagnostic testing, the initial findings, the initial reports were that routine multiplex PCR testing was positive for rhinovirus, Enterovirus. There was a very high influx of samples to CDC for coronavirus laboratory. CDC, I think there were maybe, 3 or 4 state labs able to type. Otherwise, the bulk of these came to the CDC coronavirus laboratory. And we actually prioritized and asked for specimens from severe respiratory illness to be sent. Overall, I think there were about 1,600 respiratory specimens sent during a 2-month period, which led to the development of a real-time PCR, RT-PCR assay specific for EV-D68. And of those specimens tested, just less than half were EV-D68, and that was the predominant pathogen identified. Oops. So just in summary from the outbreak, there were 1,153 confirmed cases in 49 U.S. states and D.C. from mid-August of 14 through mid-January of 15. These were just confirmed. Certainly, we know this is only a small proportion of those that were actually EV-D68. Certainly, children were predominantly affected. The history of asthma and reactive airways disease was very commonly reported. Up to 59% of hospitalized patients were admitted to the ICU. 28% required mechanical ventilation, and less than 1% died. And so I just wanted to reflect back on the reports, the EV-D68 reports historically from this, just to show what a unusual event this was. And you can see the 26 that I mentioned from 1970 to 2005 carries on until 2014, 1,395 reports in this, which represented 68% of all the reports in the surveillance system. Certainly, we've never seen that sort of those sorts of numbers as a proportion of reports. So really, an extremely unusual year, and I think it led to a tremendous increase in awareness about enteroviral disease and EV-D68 in particular. And then I'll just also point out 2016, we also saw a smaller bump that year, 138 cases reported. Historically, a large year, and it was 41% of reports in nesting in that year. It's still about 10% of the cases seen in 2014. More modest numbers after that, and this year, as of August 30th, we've had 9 reports, although there's certainly, as a limitation of our surveillance, we understand there's a lag in reporting, so that's certainly a preliminary number. So from EV-D68, I wanted to move on quickly to EV-A71 activity in the U.S. So historically, A71 has not been commonly reported in the U.S. This is looking at 2003 to 2017. Historically, less than 2% of the total number of reports between 2003 and 2017, and total during that period, 130 reports. However, again, the limitations of reporting of EV-A71 is not mandatory, and we do not do systematic surveillance for HFMD. So this is definitely going to represent the more severe end of the spectrum, and only a small, really, line of that. But then just this year, a very unusual event in the U.S. occurred, and to some extent still occurring. The largest outbreak of EV-A71, certainly neurologic disease, was reported from Colorado. So beginning and this was reported in MMWR a couple of weeks ago. But beginning in May of 2018, providers at a large children's hospital in Colorado reported a 2.5-fold increase in meningitis and encephalitis, a 3-fold increase in EV-RV detections, and PP1 sequencing of those with EV-RV positive with neurologic disease. EV-A71 was detected. To this, at least as of August 26th, Colorado had reported 34 cases of EV-A71 associated neurologic disease, certainly the largest cluster ever reported in the United States. The publication in MMWR characterized the first 13 of those 34 cases, and I'll just quickly touch on some of those findings. So among the 13 illness onset were between March 10th and June 5th. That in and of itself is different. That's sort of earlier than we would expect enterovirus activity in general in the U.S. So it happened very early, still occurring to some extent. Median age of those first 13 were 13 months, ranging from 10 days to 35 months, predominantly male. 12 of 13 had meningitis, 9 of 13 with encephalitis, 3 of 13 with acute flaccid myelitis or AFM. All had fever, 3 had rash consistent with HFMD, 7 with ataxia, 6 with myoclonus, 4 with limb weakness, 2 with cranial nerve deficits, and 1 reported seizure. All 13 children had EV-A71 identified in nasopharyngeal, pharyngeal, or rectal specimens. 9 of 10 with CSF specimens analyzed had a pleocytosis. Median WBC count was 106, range of 17 to 698, and normal as 0 to 5. So 2 of the 11 CSF pan EV-RT-PCR positive. 1 was available for typing and typed as EV-A71. 6 of the 8 children had brain imaging abnormalities. 5 of 6 with brain stem abnormalities. 3 of 6 with cerebellar abnormalities. 3 of 6 with spinal cord abnormalities. All 13 were hospitalized. Median was 5 days, a range of 1 to 23 days. 4 of 13 required intensive care. Fortunately, there were no deaths. And 3 of the 3 with AFM had residual limb weakness at discharge. So in summary, just to sum up, surveillance for type enteroviruses in the U.S. through NEST is voluntary, passive, and limited to those laboratories able to type and willing to report. Aggregate enterovirus results collected through nerves are used to monitor percent positivity over time. EV-D68 was associated with a nationwide outbreak of severe respiratory illness during 2014. More modest numbers have been reported in subsequent years. EV-A71 has historically been reported in very small numbers in the U.S. During 2018, the largest U.S. EV-A71 neurologic disease cluster to date was reported from Colorado. So just to follow up, sort of my last slide, as I mentioned earlier, we certainly understand that domestically in the U.S., we don't have the burden of EV-A71 that exists here in other parts of Asia. The outbreaks, the severe outcomes, we're not seeing that. However, our surveillance is limited, and there's much more we would like to know about what is happening with EV-A71 in the U.S., and we feel like there's more out there than we're currently discovering. So this is why I feel particularly privileged to be here, to be able to discuss with the group, to see how other countries and places are doing surveillance, what kind of control activities, how are you managing this. We're thinking that multi-year perspective, multi-site surveillance for enterovirus-associated neurologic disease could help characterize the burden in the U.S. with population-based rates for incidence, severe disease outcomes, fatalities. Currently, we can't really comment on those things. Also to describe the economic costs associated with hospitalizations and the savings potentially that could be realized through expanded testing, which is critical, targeted treatment of severe infections, and strategies for vaccination when available in the U.S. So with that, I'll stop, and I appreciate, again, the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to taking some of the lessons learned in the region here in Taiwan to be able to inform discussions in CDC.